Yay!
Always hate opening videos with the back in my childhood bit, but there's literally no other way around it this time, so... Back in my childhood, there were 3 things I cared about: playing games, collecting things, and watching television. Yu-Gi-Oh! Ended up being a pastime that encompassed all 3 of those hobbies, what with the Saturday morning anime, the physical card game, and the plethora of Yu-Gi-Oh! Based video games. You could call me a Yu-Gi-Oh! Mega nerd, but I'm having to do a fair bit of catching up since adult life got in the way of me being able to stay consistent in keeping up with everything Yu-Gi-Oh! Also, I've never actually dueled another human being that wasn't a member of my family, so my understanding of current metas and whatnot is solely based on what I can understand from Yuki-tubers. I've recently gotten back into opening and collecting the physical card game again, which feels unbelievably amazing. However, sifting through my older collection has me reminiscing a lot about my childhood and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Content that I grew up with. There's been a heck of a journey in between me watching Yugi's journey through Duelist Kingdom to me watching MBT, DZ, Farfa, Nim Nim, Hardleg Joe, Duel Logs, Rada, Distant Coder, Team APS, and Simo! Oh my god, there's so many of you. Anyways, while anyone today can just hop on Steam and boot up Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel to get the feeling of playing the physical card game amongst fellow Duel Monsters enthusiasts, back then it was a hell of a lot more difficult to get that experience, and I want to walk you guys through my adventures with some of my favorite, or at least notable, Yu-Gi-Oh! Games from my childhood, starting off with the first one that I ever played, the ever so bizarre and unconventional Game Boy Color game, Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark Duel Stories. Released in the United States on March 18th, 2002, it would be the first and only Yu-Gi-Oh! Game for the Game Boy Color, as well as the second ever release in the United States. The first being Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, which will be getting its own video in due time, so stay tuned. Something to note before we get into Dark Duel Stories is that although it was a Game Boy Color game, it happened to release in the States over 9 months into the lifespan of the Game Boy Advance, meaning it, alongside every other Game Boy Color game, wasn't really like built to fit into a Game Boy Advance. This always confused me as a 7-year-old and made playing this thing all that much more enigmatic to me. Like, look at this thing! I feel like I'm walking around with a tumor growing out of my Game Boy. Additionally, something pretty cool about most Yu-Gi-Oh! Games is that they are released with some actual real physical trading card games for a unique set, and Dark Duel Stories is no exception. There were actually 2 different packs of 3 cards each that you could have received upon opening your game. The first pack contained a prismatic secret rare of the Blue Eyes White Dragon, Dark Magician, and Exodia the Forbidden One. Oh, look at how much that's going for. That could pay my rent. The second pack was a lot less important and is the one me and my older brother both ended up getting. This pack contained prismatic secret rares of Seiyadu, Salamandra, and Acid Trap Hole. I've actually managed to hold onto the Seiyadu and Salamandra after all of these years, but can't for the life of me tell you where the Acid Trap Hole went. I guarantee you that one of my siblings stole it. The one you see here is one I just bought off of eBay for the sake of completing the set. So anyway, if you're unfamiliar with how the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game works, don't worry. Everyone is. Having a basic understanding of the card game helps out, so I'll give you the briefest of overviews in case you're unfamiliar. The bread and butter of how to play basic Yu-Gi-Oh! Involves normal summoning monsters once per turn to your side of the field to attack your opponent's monsters and whittle away at their life points until they drop down to 0. Each monster has specific stats like attack and defense that dictate their survivability in battle, as well as things like an elemental attribute that defines their affinity, as well as what type of monster they actually are. Combat and other things can be influenced with magic and trap cards, which are played in the row below where you play your monster cards, known as the Magic and Trap Zone. There's some hokey nonsense and specificity to the rules that I'd go into more detail about, and the current day playstyle of Yu-Gi-Oh! Has far exceeded this rudimentary explanation, but as you'll see later in the video, this game kind of just does its own thing regardless of the established rules and just expects you to adapt and accept it. As you've seen from the title and thumbnail, Dark Duel Stories gets a lot of things wrong, and we'll get into a lot of detail later on in the video about why that is. I just gotta lay some groundwork first, so bear with me for a bit. This will make some other videos on some other Yu-Gi-Oh! Games a little less tedious, so it's a one and done kind of deal. The beginning of Dark Duel Stories is pretty tame. You begin by naming your character and are unceremoniously dropped into a menu hub where you can choose what you want to go do. Go ahead and check this option off, since in order to trade, you're gonna need a link cable and another human being that takes this game seriously enough to sit down within mauling distance of you. I am one of those people. Please duel me. On the next screen, we're met with 5 challengers looking to impede our progress by any means necessary. Joey Wheeler, Tristan Taylor, Yukimoto, My Valentine, and Mako Tsunami. Call me crazy, but I don't remember Mako Tsunami ever being part of the main cast of characters, so I'm genuinely shocked he's roped in with this bunch. Isn't he the freaky fish guy? Wasn't there another character consistently seen hanging out with everyone? I guess we'll never know. Anyway, the way progression in this game works is you're going to need to duel each of these characters and win 5 times each. Besides the bragging rights and story progression, you're rewarded with a few things for partaking in the duel monstering that I'll get into in a bit. After selecting the duel that you want to face off against, you're brought into the only menu where you can check your current deck's card contents. Yeah, for everything the hub menu has, there's literally no option to modify your deck or check what cards you own. So if you ever want to look at those things, you have to first specifically select an opponent, skip past their smack-talking dialogue, and then fiddle with your deck however you please. You can always back out of the menu if you don't actually want to duel that specific person, but I always just find it funny that a deck builder makes you jump through a few hoops before you can do anything to your deck. Your starting deck will look pretty abysmal, since your most powerful normal summon is literally a 1-of Yamatano Dragon Scroll in a 40-card deck. But don't worry, because you have 3 Sinister Serpents! Yeah! But they're all crappy vanillas with no effects. Aww. Now I know what you're thinking. That's not a Yamatano Dragon Scroll. That's a Yamatano Dragon And you'd be right! This game has a notoriously bad text scroll, as well as a semi-rough translation job. B.I. White Dragon, Exod of Forbidden, Reaper of the Card? Ooh, just one? I wonder which card they're reaping. If I had to take a guess, it'd probably be Tattoo no Toshigo. This guy's just too gross. So, yeah, almost every single card of the game has their name pretty rudely cut off if there's more than 17 characters. Suddenly, Feraligatr doesn't seem so self-conscious. For the most part, the standard character text boxes are fine, but there's a bunch of instances that make for some pretty hilarious reading prompts. Used. Restructure Revolute. Inflicts damage equal to 200 times the number of enemy monsters. Summoned. I can almost guarantee you that everything looks substantially better in Japanese, since Japanese characters take up less space in the text boxes. Though I can't 100% guarantee that because, and don't freak out, I am not Japanese. I'm just a country bumpkin, partner. Another thing you may have noticed is that Sinister Serpent, despite being a pretty good old-school Yu-Gi-Oh card due to its monster effect, actually has nothing to offer here besides really terrible attack and defense values. For some reason, that we'll get into a bit later, the majority of monsters that have effects in the physical card game are effectless vanilla monsters in Dark Duel Stories. This is further exacerbated by the fact that many effectless normal monsters in the physical trading card game actually have in-game effects in Dark Duel Stories, and most of them make no sense. And also, some effect monsters have different effects in-game, probably to give me a headache on purpose.
It's working.
But back to dueling. Most of my fond memories of Dark Duel Stories stem from the very beginning area of the game, since despite your deck's low power level, there's a fair bit of fun to be had in discovering one of this game's most unique mechanics, fusing monsters together. For those not in the know, a rather lackluster mechanic in Caveman Yu-Gi-Oh! Is fusing monsters together with a card known as Polymerization. These fusion monsters always had 2 specific materials that you'd need to have in your deck, and most of the time those specific materials sucked mega ass, or the end result wasn't worth the effort. So you would need to have 2 very specific cards either on your side of the field or in your hand, as well as a polymerization card. And then you combine them all together to make a monster that was outclassed by other more powerful yet lower investment monster options. In Dark Duel Stories, Polymerization the card doesn't exist, instead being a base mechanic allowing you to attempt to fuse together any 2 monsters from your hand. The fusion materials themselves also work a bit differently in this game than in base Duel Monsters, since although you can still make things like Rabid Horseman from Battleox and Mystic Horseman, most of the time the traits of the monsters that you're using are what matters when creating a new fusion monster. Let me put it this way. Turupurun and Caminera Kazao create Bolt Escargot, but so does Amoeba and Electric Lizard, as well as Ancient White Turtle and Lala Leoon. So, adding a weak water monster and a weak electric monster together creates Bolt Escargot. Once you pick up on what the game is implying through these specific card interactions, the more silly combos you end up discovering. Combining Winged Cleaver and Swordsman from a Foreign Land creates Cockroach Knight. Cockroach Knight! You see? It's a bug and a guy with a sword, so combining them makes a bug guy with a sword! Like, look at him! It's a cockroach that's a knight! So cool, dude. So cool. There's a lot of weird mechanics that this adds. For example, a failed fusion simply deletes the second card in your hand from existence and takes up your action for the turn. Or another example being that a successful fusion doesn't take up your summon for the turn, meaning you can fuse a monster together and then summon something else to back it up. Though this always comes with the downside of the fusion monster not being able to take an action that turn, which is actually a rule taken directly from the anime, and it's just as stupid there as it is here. Let me attack Tristan with my wood remains. What's he gonna do? Cry about it? It's 1000 attack, you man-child. Your beginning deck is filled with a ton of these little interactions that can turn any two weak little guys into a stronger, still notably pretty weak bigger guy. Though if you're curious enough, even these mid-power guys can be combined with other things to ladder further into stronger and stronger beasts. The power level of the first round of Duelists is usually pretty low, so having something like a Bean Soldier fuse a weak plant monster like a Bish Flower and a weak warrior like our ninja can very easily sool the entire duel pretty handily. Although that one of Yabatano Dragon Scroll can fuse with your one of Abyss Flower to make Black Dragon Jungle King, which is really strong for this point in the game. Just don't make the mistake of fusing it in your hand, since if you do, you'll need to tribute summon it if you want it on the field due to it having 6 stars instead of 4. Although this would make duels pretty unique in their own right, the game actually throws us yet another curveball that completely recontextualizes how we play Duel Monsters in the form of the type effectiveness chart. Yeah, for some reason, Dark Duel Stories picked up a few things from Pokemon and applied it here in the most bizarre way possible. Every monster has a type that influences how it interacts with fusions, being the first type on their statistics page. However, the second type that you see affects the monster directly in combat specifically. What I mean is, if a player's monster has a type advantage over their opponents, no matter the difference in attack and defense power between the two, the monster with the type advantage will always destroy the one with the disadvantage. This, hilariously, means you can get hysterical interactions like a Skull Demon being defeated by a depressed person, the Invincible Engine of Destruction being trounced by a Widow Furball, and a Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon being defeated by Egg. This is the face of true terror. The type matchup chart is as follows. Wind beats Earth, Earth beats Thunder, Thunder beats Aqua, Aqua beats Pyro, Pyro beats Forest, and Forest beats Wind. I guess because they, like, get stuck in the trees or something? I don't know, man. There's also Dreams monsters that beat Shadow monsters, Shadow monsters beating Light monsters, Lights beating Fiends, and Fiends which beat Dreams monsters. Yes, Dreams Monsters, which is a type of monster that is just now, in the year of our Lord, 2023, debuting in the physical trading card game for the very first time. Man, this game was, like, way ahead of the curve. There's also Divine monsters that have no elemental weakness and have to be defeated either by card effect or through battle. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Divine monsters. Can we please get a spell checker in here? So despite what you may end up summoning to make your opponent cower in fear, there's always the chance that their set monster will spell the doom of your unbeatable corroding shark? This also works in your favor, since both Yugi and Joey can summon things like the Dark Magician or the Red Eyes Black Dragon, and if you have the appropriate counter, then they don't pose nearly as big of a threat as they normally would. One of the most hilarious things about Dark Duel Stories is its AI. It is very exploitable, but mostly for speeding up tedious gameplay. One of the tried and true methods of staying in duels when your opponent has a monster that you can't beat over is to just set a monster in defense mode each turn. Obviously, when the highest attack monster that you'll have hovers around 1000 attack, slowly chipping away at your opponent's 8000 life points can end up becoming pretty exhausting, since at least one of your monster's attacks is gonna be spent removing their set Zone Eater. bigger each turn. For some reason, the AI really hates hidden cards being cards that haven't activated their effects or attacked yet. So if you place a monster in defense position every turn, even if it's been consistently proven that your monsters are always better than theirs, they'll attack into it with whatever weak card that they have, taking some minor battle damage every time. Then, you can just attack over their weak monster for some more battle damage, set another monster, and then just repeat the process to end battles quicker. This is particularly good against Tristan Taylor, since he doesn't have a single monster in his deck with an attack stat of over 300, making him the best candidate to farm for certain things. For every duel that you succeed in, you get a brand new card of varying quality from each individual duelist drop pool. Now, once you've gotten the hang of the fusion mechanic, finished mollywopping Joey, Yugi, and Tristan, and gotten a few new cards to replace some less optimal ones, it's time to face the real challenge of the first area, My Valentine and Mako Tsunami. And it's at this point that the game makes it very clear exactly what kind of experience that you're in for. Both Mai and Mako have what I'll call tribal decks, in that they are competently built and revolve around highlighting one specific type of monster, Mai's being female winged beasts, and Mako's being aqua/water monsters. Most of these synergies are amplified by equipped magic cards, which are magic cards that boost a monster of a specific type by 1 stage, or in other words, it just gives them an extra 500 attack and defense points. They also have field magic cards that give their specific tribal monsters an additional 30% boost to their stats. Yes, another ruling taken directly from the TV show, and it makes all of their monsters have absolutely wild stats. Like, I haven't seen stats this weird since King of Yamamakai. These power-ups turn most of their monsters from vaguely threatening to nigh unbeatable with some unlucky draws. And with the way RNG works in this ancient Game Boy Color game, most of the time they open with at least 2 boosts ready to go, meaning you have to contend with a monster that's already at over 1500 attack points from turn 1 onwards. Not to mention, Mai can just normal summon Harpy Lady, who starts with 1300 attack points out of the gate, and Mako can tribute summon Fortress Whale, who has 2350 attack points, and is divine for some reason, meaning you can't beat it by using elemental weaknesses. And yes, all of their stat increasing cards work on these 2 monsters. Now, if you've been keeping track, most of your silly little fusions in your silly little deck full of mismatched and unsynergetic cards don't exactly break the bank in terms of raw attack power, and honestly take a wild amount of setup and luck to draw into them. So, you've got 3 options if you want to be able to contend with Mako or Mai. Option 1 is to get lucky. You could end up opening the duel in such a way that no matter what Mai or Mako do, you just outpace them before they end up drawing any of their power cards. You may have gotten a power player from your first couple of card rewards, and that could be enough to carry you through these fights. This is very rare, and banking on this happening can lead to a lot of headache as there is no in-game concede button, and if they happen to have an unoutable monster on their side of the field, all you can do is wait for them to finish painting the floor with the contents of your skull before you can move on and try again. Option 2 is to build your deck to counter theirs. Like I said before, every monster type has a weakness, so building your deck to include a lot of electric monsters to beat Mako, or forest monsters to beat Mai is an alright, albeit tedious method of scraping by them. It still requires you to actually receive these types of monsters as card rewards from duels, and you have no control over what you receive. I really don't like this method, since on top of having to readjust your deck for the next opponent, both Mako and Mai actually put in a few types of monsters to counter the counter to their tribal typing. Man, these guys really don't mess around. Option 3 is to grind. There's almost no other way around it, and I'll explain to you why. Remember when I mentioned those equipped magic cards? The things making this whole problem exist in the first place? Even if you magically started with every single one of them in your inventory, you literally wouldn't be able to use any of them. And the reason is because of 2 things: your duelist level and your deck capacity. When you begin the game, you have a duelist level of 15 and a deck capacity of 400. Every card in the game has what's known as a cost before you can put it into your deck, and higher tier cards have a higher cost that you have to pay. In order for you to even be able to play a card, your duelist level must be at or above the cost of the card, and then you have to have enough space in your deck for it to be able to fit. So what do the equip cards cost to be able to be placed in your deck? Oh, just a casual 150. Okay, so maybe that's not such a big deal. After all, you can raise your duel level and deck capacity by dueling other people, right? Well, you can, and you're going to need to fit better cards in there eventually, but the rate is fairly slow. For each duel that you participate in, your deck capacity is increased by 5 points, and for each duel that you win, your duelist level is increased by 1 or 2. So let's say magically when you start the game, you have an equipped card already, and you wanted to use it in your deck. In order for you to be able to use it at all, and for it to fit, you would need to take part in 30 duels to get the deck capacity necessary, as well as win between 68 and 135 duels in order for your duelist level to be at the appropriate number to be able to use freaking beast fangs. Now that's a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! To make things a little more insane, Mako doesn't just have one equipped card in his deck. He has 3. Yes, 3 copies of Power Up Kaishin to boost his Aqua Monsters. And Mai has 2 Electro Whip and 1 Cyber Shield to boost her Femme Fatales. Is that how you say that word? Femme Fatal? I don't know. So you know what that means. Time to go beat up your local card game loving trio for their lunch money until you can get some good card drops and up your stats. And just to add a little bit of spice to this ever-growing fire, even if you end up with a fairly decent deck by the end of the 3rd hour of grinding and somehow make it past Mako and Mai unscathed, you won't even come close to surviving the next wave of duelists. Dark Duel Stories becomes very punishing very quickly. It's not uncommon to get to the next screen of duelists and not walk away with a single victory for a very long time. Remember that our deck's best initial damage output is a 1 tribute, very specifically fused together monster that requires 2 one-of monsters in a 40 card deck at 2100 attack. And checking out the drop rates for the first 5 duelists, here are the highest attack point normal summonable monsters that you can obtain, along with their percentage chance to drop. Tristan can drop Oscillo Hero number 2, that is 1000 base attack, at a 0.63% chance to drop. Mako can drop Fiend Kraken and Jellyfish, that both have 1200 base attack and have a 0.83% chance of dropping. My Valentine can drop Armored Zombie that has 1500 base attack and a 1.56% chance of dropping. Yugimoto can drop Great White that has 1600 attack points at a 0.98% drop rate. And Joey Wheeler can drop an Axe Raider that has 1700 attack points at a 0.63% drop rate. In a perfect world, you'd have 3 copies of each duelist's best cards in your own deck, ready to go. But ask any shiny hunter or speedrunner what they think about random chance, and you start to see the bigger picture of how royally screwed you are. If you give any of these next duelists even a single turn of setup, they will annihilate you. I say that like you have any control over the cards that they draw. Let's go down the line of our next rogues gallery. Esperoba has both Cyber Raider and Reflect Bounder, the first of which has 1400 attack and the latter has 1700. He can also tribute summon the Fiend Mega Cyber or even Jinzo, both of which have over 2000 attack points. And if you're curious, Espa also has 3 copies each of Invigoration and Machine Conversion, which work with every single one of the monsters listed. Rex Raptor has a plethora of dangerous dinos to normal summon with the likes of Two-Headed King Rex, Crawling Dragon number 2, Grillby, and Trachodon. He can also tribute summon Mega Zowler, Practical, and Brachio Radius with a single tribute. And he also has 3 copies of Beast Fangs and Raise Body Heat, as well as 3 copies of Wasteland to power up their monsters. Good luck having them not open a monster with over 1000 attack on turn 1. Seeker actually doesn't have a lot of high offensive power, but he does have 3 copies of Stone Statue of the Aztecs, a monster that protects him with a massive 2000 defense, which he also likes to tribute summon over with his 3 copies of Gear Golem the Moving Fortress, which has even higher defense. He sits on these guys until he literally just draws into Exodia. Yeah, you're at risk of getting Exodia'd by this guy. Pandora has 3 Dark Energy alongside 3 of the Yummy Field Magic card to boost all of his Magicians and Shadow Monsters, the most powerful being Mystic Clown at 1500 attack and Doll of Demise at 1600. Weevil Underwood literally only has 2 monsters in his deck that have less than 1000 attack points after a forest is played, those being Basic Insect and Cocoon of Evolution, the latter of which has 2000 defense points and for some reason allows Weevil to turn it into the Great Moth, which has 26 600 attack points, and then a turn later into the perfectly ultimate Great Moth, which has 3,500 attack. In 2 screens, we have gone from Yugi normal summoning Kuribo to being on the receiving end of one of the most powerful monsters, stat-wise, in old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Oh, and if you thought that was an overkill, Revo loves to beef this thing up with his own plethora of power-ups, in the form of laser cannon armor and insect armor with laser cannon. Not to mention, everything else in his deck easily cracks the 2000 bar with just a few boosts. It is nauseating. Oh, and Kaiba has Lajin, the Mystical Genie of the Lamp, at 1800 attack, Battle Ox at 1700, and Mystic Horseman that he loves to fuse with his Battle Ox to make Rapid Horseman that literally sits pretty with a whopping 2000 attack points. Not to mention, he also has 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, that he has 3 Dragon Treasure to power up. You know, just in case you thought you stood a chance. So, what the f***? Like, literally, what the f*** do you expect me to do? Well, if the game's gonna be a janky, unfair mess, then we'll have to beat it at its own game. Now, let me be clear. In order to get anywhere in this game, you will need to grind, at least a fair while. That's what Dark Duel Stories expects you to do. Grind until you farm good card drops from the first batch of duelists, duelist level to wield them, and more space in your deck to fit everything. And honestly, if you got 5 or 6 hours to spare, this is an alright method of detaching yourself from reality and forgetting that we all live in the worst timeline imaginable. I actually pick this game up from time to time when I'm traveling, as the tedium helps me get through long flights or waiting periods when I've got nothing better to do. Or you could do what the people who made the game manual did and just hack in everything. Come on guys, you ain't slick. I know you didn't get that 9,999 deck capacity legit. Americans, am I right? We need stats and cards to get anywhere, and the drop rates for anything worthwhile are fairly abysmal. But maybe there's a few shortcuts that we can take advantage of, and oh boy, do these ever crack Dark Duel Stories wide open. Back in the main menu hub, you probably noticed the password section. Going into this mode lets you input the 8-digit passwords that exist on every single Yu-Gi-Oh card and allows you to add them to your collection. Yes, you can literally give yourself any card from your physical collection as long as it's one that's in the card database for Dark Duel Stories. From the moment you start the game, you can actually just load up on the best cards in the game without ever even having dueled your first opponent. Although you can only ever add 1 copy of a card this way. Now, I'm about to list off a few of my favorites that I like to add whenever I get tired of eviscerating one particularly blonde-haired Brooklyn resident, but if you played this game before and have a couple of your own tried and true go-to cards, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. Jirai Gumo is usually a god-awful monster to attack with, because if you call the coin flip wrong, you lose half of your life points. But in Dark Duel Stories, it's literally just a normal summonable 2200 attack monster. The highest attack normal summonable monster in the game, as a matter of fact. Big Shield Garda is in a similar boat because although it has outrageously high defense, it only blocks 1 attack before having to switch to offense. But, not in Dark Duel Stories! Just get to set a guy in defense that has enough defense to hold off a Dark Magician without even breaking a sweat. Castle of Dark Illusions, or Castle of Dark Magic as it's called in this game, is also a huge normal summonable butt. Summon Skull is still the best tribute summonable monster in the game. Just plain and simple, if your opponent doesn't have a light monster or a bunch of equip cards, you basically just win the duel for free. Cybertech Alligator also fulfills this role too if you feel you need a second 2500 1 tribute monster, or just don't like Summon Skull's fiend typing. Though if you really like Summon Skull, you can add a second copy in by using the password for Toon Summon Skull, which also has no downside since Toon World isn't a thing in this game. But how do you get tribute material for your big guys? Well, look no further than Doron? For some reason, in Dark Duel Stories, if you activate his special ability, you just get an extra Doron on the field. One of them is bound to get run over since their sets are pretty low, but the other one is prime material to get tributed for your bigger guys. Toadmaster and Spirit of the Book have similar abilities, Toadmaster summoning a Frog the Jam, and Spirit of the Book summoning a Buku for completely free. Beast King of the Swamps is literally a dark hole in this game for some reason, so even if Weevil gets his perfectly ultimate Great Moth on the field, or Mako gets his unoutable Fortress Whale, you can just nuke the field for the low cost of a normal summon and whatever else you had on the field. It also costs way less than the real dark hole to put in your deck, so that's a huge plus. Lajin, the mystical genie of the lamp, Gemini elf, 7-colored fish, mechanical chaser, giant red sea snake, and Battleox are some of the best normal summons in the game in terms of attack stats, and basically make up your normal summon core and damage output. And funnily enough, Electric Lizard and Nemoriko can actually just paralyze some of your opponent's best monsters for a turn while you figure out what you're gonna do to counter them. Invisible Wire, Acid Trap Hole, and Widespread Ruin are some of the best removal cards in the game, and for some reason they're outrageously cheap to put in your deck. Invisible Wire literally costs as much as an Uguchi to put in your deck. But then again, now you have to choose between Uguchi and Invisible Wire. Gosh, now that's a real problem. Nowadays, you can just look up a list of all the passwords for every single card in the game on the internet. It kind of takes away the magic of it, but it honestly beats sifting through a bunch of useless bulk held together by a really damaging rubber band. Can you imagine the amount of priceless super rares absolutely obliterated by these things? Breaks my heart, man. 7-year-old me would have easily given away one of my vital organs just for the chance to even glance at what amounts to a very long and boring text document full of random numbers. It was that valuable! I know a few of you may consider that cheating or missing the point of the game, and to that I say, you're a stronger person than me, that's for sure. Putting in passwords still takes a pretty long time, but if you don't want to spend an hour basically modifying your deck with hand-picked cards, boy do I have the alternative for you. So I put it off this late in the video, but I wanted to talk about card rewards. When you defeat another person in a duel, you're given a random card from that duelist drop pool. Every duelist has some pretty okay cards that they can drop, and some pretty not okay cards that are power crept long before they even have the capacity to be placed in your deck. But along these card rewards is another mystery bonus drop known as a card part. Dumb 7-year-old me thought that the Yu-Gi-Oh card itself that you won was the card part, and that was just some sort of translation error, but no, that is not what that was. Another menu on the main menu hub is the construction section, which lets you combine card parts into brand new Yu-Gi-Oh cards. These are all non-official, except the time a few of them were, but not really, and all use pretty bizarre artwork that seems so out of place for a Yu-Gi-Oh game. Like, look at this and tell me I'm not playing some sort of bootleg AI-generated card game. The components of a constructed card are a top part and a bottom part. There's no way to know which card part you've received from a duel outside of checking your inventory after every victory, but it doesn't really matter all that much. After you've gotten enough tops and bottoms, you can spend a couple minutes trying out different matches and finding out that this mechanic is one of the most broken things in the entire game. I'm not really sure how the combinations work exactly, but you can end up with cards that are either unusably bad, like look at this thing, or literally a 2000 attack, 2000 defense, normal summonable freaky-faced behemoth. And then you can proceed to make an entire deck with these and completely trivialize most, if not all, of the second screen duelists. I honestly couldn't care less if Kaiba can normal summon a Battleox, if I can summon a Pyro-type plant tentacle monster and just keep curb stopping everything he's got until I've run his ego through a meat grinder. The only thing that these cards don't exactly have going for them is their inability to ever exceed 2000 attack. So if your opponent gets the positive tempo in the duel due to a bad type matchup or unlucky equip card activation and they get a tribute summon onto the field, you're in for a world of hurt and will need to deal with it by other means. Also, apparently there's almost 10,000 unique card combinations. You guys put in 10,000 brand new cards, but you couldn't even spell divine correctly? SMH. So there we have it. We literally can't lose, right? We have an entire deck filled with literal custom cards and can pick and choose from pretty much every single card in the game if we wanted to. Dark Duel Stories is toast! How could we possibly end up taking a loss? Oh, you sweet, sweet, innocent child. This game hasn't even begun to show its true hand.
If you thought these Herculean leaps and strides would shield you from the horrors yet wrought upon you, make no mistake, the worst has yet to come.
The next 4 duelists are where Dark Duel Stories goes from a very tough difficulty curve to literally just fighting opponents who are actually just cheating. And out of the 800 cards that are available in the game, it comes down to just 6. Dark Hole, Raigeki, Megamorph, Brain Control, Change of Heart, and Swords of Revealing Light. Every duelist from here on out will have some combination of these 6 cards in their deck, and they are the most impactful and outrageously powerful cards in all of Dark Duel Stories. The reason I didn't recommend any of these in the password section is because if you're not 100% committed to playing Dark Duel Stories the way it wants to be played, you'll never be able to use them anyway. In the case of Raigeki, Megamorph, and Change of Heart, you need to be the highest maximum duelist level to even add them to your deck, which is 255. And you're going to want to arm yourself with at least one of these if you want any chance of coming away victorious. Dark Hole and Raigeki are board wipes. Raigeki destroys all of your opponent's monsters, while Dark Hole just destroys every monster on the field. Brain Control and Change of Heart steal your opponent's strongest monster, but while Brain Control forces you to give it back at the end of the turn, Change of Heart just lets you keep it forever. Megamorph is the most generic equip card in the game, boosting any monster by 500 attack and defense. It's basically just any archetypal equip card, just without needing to worry about a specific type of monster to attach it to. And Swords of Revealing Light is the card to have, making it to where your opponent cannot attack you at all for 3 turns, allowing you to set up or just have the ability to have monsters in attack position without fear of them being destroyed. There is no magic and trap card zone in Dark Duel Stories, so there's no way to preemptively remove this card until the entire effect resolves. Dark Duel Stories doesn't follow any sort of ban list or anything, instead having an outrageously small limited list. You can only ever have 1 copy of each of these cards in your deck due to their staggering power level. So of course, every duelist that uses the 6 cards I mentioned prior have multiple copies of them in their decks. Yeah! Paradox has 3 copies of Brain Control, Priest Seto has 3 copies of Dark Hole, Raigeki, Megamorph, and Change of Heart, Ishizu has 3 copies of Dark Hole, Swords of Revealing Light, and Megamorph, and Slicing has 3 copies of Raigeki, Swords of Revealing Light, and Megamorph. Yes, I know it's Heishin and not Slicing, and I will get to that. One thing at a time, please. The entire house is on fire, and I only have this garden hose. I am very overwhelmed at the moment. The quality of the monsters that you have in your deck at this point almost doesn't matter, since they'll either be nuked from orbit with the board wipe cards, or literally just stolen and used against you with the monster stealing cards. Nothing's worse than finally beating over something with your Jirai Gumo, just for it to get Change of Hearted and backed up by another dude, punching you for half of your life points. Like I said before, if you're also not running these cards, you're basically fighting an uphill battle. You would have to get outrageously lucky to walk away from any of these 4 duelists with a victory without at least 1 copy of some of these power cards in your deck. Go ahead and pray to RNGesus and clench your butt cheeks, because it is about to get brutal. Once you somehow beat all 4 of these duelists 5 times each, it's time for Dark Knight, who for all intents and purposes may as well be a combination of these duelists. Let me lay it out for you. 3 copies of Raigeki, 3 copies of Change of Heart, a Brain Control, 3 copies of Swords of Revealing Light, 3 copies of Megamorph, and 3 copies of Jirai Gumo, among other cards. It is brutal. Remember when this game was a fun little type matchup dance? Remember the little fusions you could come up with? Wasn't Cockroach Knight just the best? Corroding Shark, Bolt Escargot? Man, good times. I have no advice on how to beat Dark Knight outside of literally just don't listen to this bozo try to talk down to you after he wins. He's literally not abiding by the same set of rules that you have to. Keep throwing yourself at him and try to overwhelm him with everything you've got. Outlast all of his broken cards with your own, and maybe keep kicking Tristan in the nuts for some deck capacity and duelist level. And after you beat him 5 times in a row, it's over. You've finally done it. Dark Knight relents and gives you an 8-digit passcode that lets you view the credits. You did it! Oh my god! Yeah! Oh my god, I've never seen something so beautiful. Oh my god. And yeah, that's everything that Dark Duel Stories has to offer. I can't believe we actually managed to beat everyone. Just kidding! After beating Dark Knight, we unlock the final area known as the Dark Stage. The duelist that you can face in the Dark Stage by default is Yami Yugi, who is honestly a joke at this point of the game. Like, look at this deck list, what are you doing? Though if you happen to have a few specific extra codes, you can actually change which duelist is present there to shake things up. These duelists are Nightmare, which is a more difficult version of Dark Knight, Shoddy, who's honestly not all that bad and is prone to having a handful of unusable tribute monsters, Yami Bakura, who is the hardest duelist in the entire game. Do not attempt to duel this man! And Merrick Ishtar, who is hilariously terrible. And if you want to farm good cards, just keep dueling this idiot over and over. Wait, Merrick Ishtar is locked behind a secret password to even duel? Isn't he on the cover of the game? What the frick, bro? That's some hokey malokey nonsense right there. So on the topic of these codes, I'm not actually sure, like, where you're actually supposed to get them from. Obviously, with today's internet connectivity, you can just Google them all in like 5 seconds, but as far as I'm aware, there's no actual way to know where to find them in-game, nor even any hints of their existence from base gameplay. I was convinced that Yamayuki was the true final boss for the longest time, since that's what I grew up believing. The game manual doesn't even mention the codes anywhere, and the Prima guide kinda just unceremoniously gives them to you in this purple box here. Were these like some sort of giveaway or event thing? There's not a whole lot of information about them online. If anyone knows the answer, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And speaking of passwords that no one talks about, there's an even secreter password, not even mentioned in the Prima Guide, that adds a unique addition to the standard gameplay loop. Putting in the code 65437205 in the password section unlocks Yuki's grandpa, but rather than him being another duelist for you to face, he actually functions as a second source of card rewards. After activating this passcode, in addition to being given a card from a particular duelist card drop list, as well as a card part from Taya after each duel, Solomon Moto will give you a bonus card drop from his own impressive list of possible drops, as well as an additional card part. I really wish I knew this as a kid, and doubly so when I started recording all the footage for this video, since having Solomon active literally doubles the amount of cards and card parts that you receive, and speeds up the tedious grind of the game a great deal. Take a look at some of the cards he can drop. Every single trap card in the game, every single magic card in the game, and even Armed Ninja, who of course attacks with big scythe and spikes. Literally so cool. But literally, how are you supposed to know that this even exists? Even Solomon is surprised when he shows up. He's like, oh, damn, okay, I got cards. You want cards? I got cards. Yeah, okay. So that's pretty much Dark Duel Stories at a cursory glance. 15 pages into my script. Why do I do this to myself? Ooh, let's make a quick video on a really old Yu-Gi-Oh game. It'll be 20 minutes tops. Not. Anyway, what's gonna follow now is a bunch of sporadic stuff that wouldn't fit anywhere else in the video, and most of it has to do with the jank nonsense of the game and some comparisons with the real-world physical trading card game. First off, despite Dark Duel Stories being the only Yu-Gi-Oh game released for the Game Boy Color in the United States, that's actually not the case in Japan, as it's actually the third installment in a series simply known as Duel Monsters, the first game being released on the original Game Boy and just being titled Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. The sequel to this was released on the Game Boy Color, also as a Japanese exclusive, and it was titled Duel Monsters 2 Dark Duel Stories. Yeah, the game we're playing is actually known as Duel Monsters 3 Tri-Holy God Advent. I'm assuming this name is in reference to the 3 Egyptian god cards, Obelisk the Tormentor, Slifer the Sky Dragon, and the Winged Dragon of Ra. 3 cards which, of course, do not exist in any capacity in this game. Most of the mechanics that exist in our Dark Duel Stories are carried over from the Japanese Dark Duel Stories, as well as a fair number of card sprites and other assets. Although, checking out some of the other duelists available in the second game has me a little jealous, since you can duel Ryo Bakura, Hera and Dox, Moku Bakaiba, and, the Puppeteer of Doom? Never mind. And on the topic of sprite work, I'm genuinely baffled at how much work was put into attempting to transfer the visual art style of old school Yu-Gi-Oh cards into a pixel-based format. And honestly, for there being literally 800 individual cards in Dark Duel Stories, most of them are basically one-to-one recreations of the actual card art. Like, genuinely, look at these things and tell me this wasn't a labor of love. There are a few notable exceptions, and while some are just sort of artist interpretations of what the card kind of should look like, that's honestly not their fault. I know a lot of people, myself included, like to make fun of older Yu-Gi-Oh games and even the TV show for sort of doing whatever they wanted to and having rules and things that don't match up with the physical trading card game. But what a great deal of people don't think about are things like release dates. There's a great video by Swag Kage that goes into greater detail on this, but the Cliff Notes version is this. Yu-Gi-Oh! As a brand was never supposed to be implicitly tied to the Duel Monsters trading card game. The literal inception of Duel Monsters was nothing more than a couple chapter-long references to Magic the Gathering, and we were all supposed to nod our heads, appreciate the ode to a recognizable intellectual property, and just move on with our day. But people loved the idea of Duel Monsters so much that it ended up becoming the sole focus of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, which spelled a lot of trouble because the manga didn't exactly have a concrete rule set for what was possible, nor any way to translate certain things from paper to cardboard. So when it came time to capitalize on the Duel Monsters side of Yu-Gi-Oh! And start creating merchandise, everything that came out during that time had to do its own thing, because there was genuinely so little of the card game to actually extrapolate on. I'm sure Kazuki Takahashi had some ideas and card concepts that he knew were going to end up being made at some point, but as with every artistic endeavor, there's no actual way to know if something will ever get as popular as we hope, so there was no reason to develop the card game further beyond its initial purpose. Alright, I'm about to blow your mind. The first Duel Monsters game was released in Japan on December 16th, 1998, but the physical card game literally hadn't even received their first OCG set release until 2 months later on February 4th, 1999, with OCG Volume 1. The manga at the time of the first Duel Monsters game's release hadn't even made it halfway through the Duelist Kingdom arc, so every card looked like this, and not this, meaning that any card with or without an effect was completely unknown to the people making Duel Monsters. So they just decided to make every monster in the game an effectless vanilla monster. 7 months later, Duel Monsters 2 would be released on July 8th, 1999. At this point, the manga was at the Joey and Bandit Keith duel, so still not even close to finishing the Duelist Kingdom arc, and the most recent set to come out was Volume 3, which literally only contained 5 possible effect monsters, all of which were flip cards and, by the rules of how the Duel Monsters games are played, unable to activate their effects at all. I'll explain that in a moment, just give me a second. Duel Monsters 2 inherited every single one of the 365 cards from the Duel Monsters 1, including every single effectless monster that would go on to eventually have an effect in the physical trading card game. It itself would add 355 more cards to the mix, every single monster still remaining effectless due to them not knowing which cards would end up with real printed card effects, for a total of 720 cards total. Here's the part I'm trying to get to. When Tri-Holy God Advent was released on July 13th, 2000 in Japan, the Pharaoh's Servant set had just come out on the same day, and the manga was partly through the beginning of the Battle City arc. Like Duel Monsters 2 before it, Duel Monsters 3 simply copy and pasted all of the previous 720 cards from the previous games, only adding a pittance of 80 new cards for a total of 800 to choose from. But there was a problem. Some of the monsters that they added had real-life, explained, and printed card effects at this point, 2 of whom were actually being released as promotional cards alongside the game. And what, were they gonna make Relinquished and Thousand Eyes Restrict effectless vanilla monsters after how powerful they seemed in the manga? But a lot of monsters that they've already included in the previous 2 games had complicated and difficult to program card effects. They can barely fit all of the text in one text. Oh, I just knocked over my water bottle. They can barely fit all of the text in one text box. You think they could program the intricate card interactions of Jigen Bakudan? The standby phase? Hey, you can stand by while I phase my I don't know, man. Cut that out. That was stupid. I'll tell you what was on their minds, though. Capitalizing on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime that was set to release in less than 1 month's time from this game's own release. So what they ended up doing was giving a bunch of random monsters effects based off of already programmed in interaction mechanics of the game's engine that sort of aligned with their flavor text, and updating a few of them to align with their real-world counterparts. Goron has an effect to duplicate himself because his flavor text says so. Fire Reaper burns your opponent for 50 life points because his flavor text says so. Spirit of the Mountain changes the field to a mountain because, and say it with me, his flavor text says so. But like I said, there were a lot of effects that absolutely could not work with the current limitations of the game's engine and software that they were working with. So things like being able to quick effect discard Kuriboh to the graveyard to negate a battle's worth of damage, or destroying an opponent's non-machine type monster 2 turns after battling it were a no-go. But they could provide Beast King of the Swamp with a Dark Hole effect because, Dark Hole was already in the game? A lot of the low attack, direct attacking monsters were updated to include a one-time free hit on the opponent's life points effect, but they forgot to update Ukichi with this little patch, and because of that, I have to give Dark Duel Stories a 0 out of 10. Absolutely unplayable. Like I alluded to earlier and am now getting to after literally an hour into the video, all of the Duel Monsters games have unique mechanics unlike the physical card game, and that's mostly due to the limitations of them being released so early on in handheld gaming's lifespan. Dark Duel Stories English game manual doesn't even define itself as a Yu-Gi-Oh! Or even a Duel Monsters game, just simply referring to the card game that you play as Dark Duel Stories itself. I guess you could call it its own unique format, since alongside the polymerization-less fusion mechanics and type matchup chart, there's a bunch of unique quirks to the system. For starters, all effect monsters can only activate their effects on the turn that they are summoned, since they are unable to do so if they're no longer considered hidden, making pretty much every effect monster besides Exodia itself a pseudo flip effect, that you, like you do it yourself, but also you don't, really flip the card face up, you just you kind of play it like this, and then you reveal it, and then you activate the effect. This is the reason why cards like Maneater Bug and Mask of Darkness are effectless, since the game's engine wasn't programmed to be able to activate flip effects. Secondly, trap cards only work for a single turn. And I don't mean they work the turn they are used, I mean that if you set a trap card, even if it doesn't end up getting activated, it disappears the next turn. Poof! Gone! Where'd it go? I'm assuming this was done so that you'd have more room to play other trap cards in case the one that you were using doesn't quite cut it. And yeah, you literally only have enough space for one active trap card and don't need to use that space to activate magic cards since they just get used from the hand. Ritual cards in this game are also not only impractical, but borderline unusable too. Ritual monsters are similar to fusion monsters in that you need specific cards to bring them out onto the field. But rather than needing specific fusion materials and a polymerization, ritual monsters require a specific ritual magic card, alongside the ritual monster itself being present in your hand, as well as enough monsters to tribute that you have an equal or greater star count than the ritual monster. If that sounds very annoying to get to happen, that's actually the physical trading card game version of ritual summoning. Dark Duel Stories' version of ritual summoning requires you to have the ritual magic card in your hand, alongside one very specific tribute already out on the field, alongside 2 other non-specific tributes. And because Dark Duel Stories loves just creating cards out of thin air, the ritual monster is spawned into existence like my will to live after getting McDonald's. Every single ritual monster's required ritual material is it kind of makes sense, but how on earth would you ever get these specific monsters alongside 2 others onto the field without them either being stolen by your opponent or outright taken out by things like Raigeki or Dark Hole, or even just battle? And in the case of Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, you literally need to have all 3 regular Blue Eyes White Dragons already out on the field in order to ritual summon it. How would you not have already beaten any opponent at that point? But the funniest part about all of this is, you don't need to ritual summon these monsters at all. Eventually, you can just get them as card drops and add them to your deck manually as tribute summonable monsters. You heard me right, you can literally tribute summon Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon for 2 tributes. Same goes for Sengenjin, Magician of Black Chaos, and the colorful spectrum of other really terrible and unplayable ritual monsters that could not be created as pack filler back in the day. And if you're wondering why these cards are considered ritual monsters, so am I, man. So am I. At the very least, every ritual spell is 0 cost to put in your deck, so you could actually load up on completely unplayable ritual monsters just to meet the deck size limit. Also, yes, a lot of characters and other things have their names completely butchered or just flat out incorrectly input within Dark Duel Stories. Simon Muran, or better known as Shimon in future English releases. Really, guys? You have an ancient Egyptian guy and your first instinct is to name him freaking Simon? Simon was named Paradox, which is weird because there actually are characters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Named Para and Dox, as well as a movie villain also just named Paradox. I have no explanation for this outside of the fact that they were probably all just tripping on acid in the localization office that day. Another hilarious mistranslation is the first two areas of the game being called Tomino Town in the game booklet. I straight up thought I was having a stroke when researching things for this video because both the wiki and the Prima guide call both of the first two sections of the game Tomino Town. And of course, there you go. It's there. You can see it. It's supposed to be Domino City, by the way. Freaking Domino Town. Get the heck out of here. The nameless rare hunter is simply known as Seeker, even though no official name was ever given to this individual, and Arcana is given his Japanese name of Pandora instead, which actually makes a whole lot of sense with the whole box shtick he had going on. You get it? Eh? Pandora's box? Eh? Also, the official Prima guide thinks he's a girl, which, you know, happy pride. But perhaps the funniest and most roundabout translation error is, of course, Slicing. Something to note regarding most of the entire Egyptian cast is that they also appear in Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, which also has a sequel known as Duelist of the Roses, which also happened to release in the United States before Dark Duel Stories did. In that game, a lot of the cast is rebranded to serve as stand-ins for the actual real-world Wars of the Roses, and several prominent characters in that conflict are swapped out for Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters. One of those characters happens to be Richard Slicing of York, which is, of course, the Heishin we all know and love from Forbidden Memories. I know Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a complicated series, but this is by far the most hilarious slip-up in the entirety of Dark Duel Stories. Like, I'm still reeling about it after all of these years. Also, yes, I will be talking about Duelist of the Roses at some point in the history of time. Anyway, I've rambled long enough that I've started to worry that I've dreamt this game up and none of it is actually real, so I'm gonna return to my gamer den and rethink my life choices. I'll be talking more about Yu-Gi-Oh! Games in the future, as well as other cool things, so follow me along that little road trip by hitting that subscribe button. This video was helped in part by my lovely patrons ATK4May, Gideon King, and Chris Schmidt. A huge thank you to you for supporting me and my work. If you'd like to support me in order for me to be able to make more content faster, head on over to my Patreon and give me your money. Give me your money. Give me your money. Also, follow me on Twitter and Tumblr and other social media stuff. All that's in the description below. Thanks so much for watching all the way through, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!